G'day and welcome to episode 16 of this live podcast of an atheist, a believer, and a pastor walk into a bar. And I have it on good authority. We are planning to make that title of this podcast a reality. We're going to do it. We're going to do it live right now. If you're watching on YouTube and Facebook, g'day, I'm your host, Peter Rowe. You can call me Rowie. I've decided, gentlemen, to call myself Rowie again because that's what I was in all of the radio career I had was Rowie, and it felt weird calling myself Peter. I don't know who I'm talking about. So you may address me as Rowie or Peter or whatever you like, but that's just what I put in there. So that was what everyone called me in my broadcast career, Rowie, so it fits well. On tonight's podcast, we're diving into one of the toughest questions out there. If there is a God, why is there cancer? How can we believe that God exists in the face of suffering? Well, some Christians like to blame the sin of Adam and Eve, and that cancer is just a part of the curse that God put on all humans after Adam and Eve disobeyed God in the Garden of Eden. Now, the thing that confuses me now, and it always has, is that some of those same Christians believe that Adam and Eve's story is just that, a story, not to be taken literally. If the adventures of Adam and Eve comic are not true, why then sickness? Why cancer? Surely it points even stronger to the evolution of our species and has nothing to do with the curse. And for those that do believe that the human race is cursed according to the scriptures, how do we explain cancer in dogs and cats or cancer in newborns? How does that work? I know all of this sits kind of unusually with our panel for everyone trying to grapple with the whole concept of if there's a God, why cancer, Christian or not. I came across this post today on an online debate, which I found interesting reading. This particular person, who will remain anonymous, sin has nothing to do with cancer, he said. Disease is an integral part of the imperfect functioning of DNA and environmental factors. Our bodies are not perfectly constructed and never have been. The options are necessarily as follows. Number one, the creator of the universe intended disease to exist. Or two, the creator of the universe is imperfect and could not create a universe free of disease. If the creator of the universe truly is omnipotent, then disease is also intended as a creation. If not, then the creator of the universe is itself bound by the laws of physics and is not omnipotent. There are no other alternatives unless you are ignorant and believe in fairy tales. For the record, this is not what I have said, but this is what this person has said. And it sits kind of well with me. I don't know about you guys. We might talk a bit more about that a little bit later. So our audience, what do you think? How does it marry for you? If there's a God, how does cancer exist? Please join us. Be a part of the podcast tonight. We are live on YouTube and Facebook, as I mentioned, which is where you can join in the conversation. That is, if you are watching on this Wednesday, the 10th of April, 2014, just after 8 p.m. Australian Western Standard Time, wherever in the world you're watching, welcome. Cancer has affected everyone in some way, shape, or form. At least one of our panel members tonight has suffered and beaten cancer. We'll get to him in a minute. Tonight, we don't claim to be experts, just our regular panel. No theologians, just a bunch of blokes trying to make sense of the big, messy question. We are sharing personal stories, some thoughts we've picked up along the way, and a whole lot of questions for believers and non-believers alike. So to the panel, it's a bit different tonight. It was going to be five of us, and I was going to say we've got two God botherers and three guys who are going to hell. That's changed now. We've only got one God botherer, and the rest of us are still going to hell. But say no more. I'm one of those. I like spicy food, so I'm off. I'm in the line for sure. Next is a man who keeps the farmers, the Albany locals, and the sheep entertained on the radio, Jason Jordan. Welcome back, Jace.
More of your favourite classic hits. Yeah, it's Jace. G'day. How you doing?
The well-travelled and friend to those being treated unfairly and unjustly, Suresh Rajan. Thank you so much for your time again, Suresh.
Yeah, good to be here.
Luke not with us. He's on school holidays. Well, he's not, but his kids are, so he's got to look after them. And a man who loves kind of cerebral challenges when it comes to God, Richard Stores. G'day, Rich.
G'day, mate. Good to
Great
be
to have
here
you all
again.
back. Thank you so much for making the podcast possible. It wouldn't be very exciting if it were just me, but at least I would have great pleasure in always being right. So I believe that one of the two following is real: God or cancer. They can't coexist. Someone who knows only too well about cancer is a survivor, Suresh Rajan. Why do you think you got cancer, and at what point did you ask God to heal you?
I the issue around why I got cancer is actually easier to answer than the other part of it as to when I asked God to heal me. I, like someone else who does similar sort of work, was going out and eating every day of the week at various restaurants while I reviewed them for radio. And it's now well established that the main reason for my cancer was that I was eating a lot of preserved foods, a lot of foods that were made artificially created and artificially preserved with chemicals rather than naturally preserved foods when you eat out at restaurants and the like. And basically, my cancer was a stomach cancer, and it basically took up all of my stomach, and that's the reason why they had to actually remove my stomach. They removed 2/3 of my stomach, and it was also in 21 lymph nodes around the stomach, and had come about 3 weeks after I'd had a heart attack and a quadruple bypass. So it was all really lovely in a lovely 3-week period. But I don't know that it can be seen as any visitation by God. My
Oh,
view.
come on, Suresh. That was a smiting if I ever saw one.
Absolutely. But look, it was quite interesting because it actually, as I've said before in these podcasts, that it actually took me to a different space. I mean, I was born a Hindu and had grown up in an Islamic country in Brunei. Only ever went to Anglican and Catholic colleges and schools all my life, and lived in a Hindu fundamentalist country in India. So pretty much exposed to every religion and disliked all of them intensely. It did take me to a space where I felt that the only person who was going to have any prospect of healing was myself, and I was going to get myself better. I needed to do all the things that I do now, which is around exercise and eating well and doing all of those things that have prolonged my life already 12 years more than the doctors expected. So yeah, it's they gave me 6 months to live, and I'm now into my 13th year since diagnosis. So but it took me very much to that space of saying no one else is going to be responsible for my health. I've got to be the one who's doing it. And I know, Jace, a lot of this also sort of fits in with what you've been through as well. Whilst not necessarily cancer, you've gone through, fairly major life-changing illness, etc. So yeah, it took me very much from being a believer to being a complete non-believer.
How does that sit with you now, Suresh, when you hear about? Because it's challenging if you're such a powerful example of what a person can do. Because one of the things that I found very frustrating as a Christian was being so reliant on there being a God to help me out in all situations, and so you kind of get a little bit lax about the whole thing, bit lazy, bit I'll get sorted out by God at the right time when I need to. All I have to do is ask. How does that sit with you now, showing us what you have done in the last 13 years?
I'm much more comfortable with this belief that every one of us has that capacity to do it themselves, and I spend a lot of my time trying to convince people of that. I get people to talk about their illnesses because I've always found in every place that I've worked at, when I've worked at the Epilepsy Association, for example, I would get people to document their journey with epilepsy simply because that process of documenting it, I found extremely cathartic for myself. I found it really, really useful to sit down. And I remember going on air, I think the day after my quadruple bypass, 6PR rang me, and I did the interview, and right at the very end of it, one of them said, "Oh, what's all that noise in the background?" And I said, "Oh, it's just these machines here." And they said, "What machines?" I said, "Well, I'm in intensive care. I just had a quadruple bypass yesterday." And they've gone, "Right, you're doing a radio program, when you're just come out of intensive care." But
Yeah.
I always insisted that, and I've done this to others who've been on air, and people that Jace and Pete. I've convinced them that they need to talk about their illness publicly, and they need to talk about it and really be very open about it, because talking about it gives you that sense of control. When you sit down and talk about it and rationalize it, you actually sit down and think, yes, I could have done that better, or I shouldn't have done that. And that's what's actually going to help me now to get to a place where I'm going to be disease free. And it really became a case of being very open, and talking about it. And now I convinced lots of people who have tended to be very, very secretive about their illnesses to say, look, stuff it, get out there and talk about it. If you want to talk about it on air, I'll make sure that I'll find someone who'll do an interview with you, because I think that talking about it just gives you that sense of you understand it, you now control it, and no longer does it control you. And that's been something that I've been really pushing very hard with lots of people.
Cross-examination, Jason and Rich, anything you'd like to ask? Suresh seems he is the, obviously a man who has gone through the experience himself, something that we don't wish upon anyone, and we hope that we manage to get through our lives avoiding it. But anything you guys would like to talk to Suresh about?
I've known Suresh for a very long time. First time I ever really came across Suresh was at 6PR. I was presenting at the time, and Suresh was a saber rattler who would call up and say all sorts of things that were a little bit confrontational at times. But one of the things I learned about Suresh is that regardless of what he said or how he said it, his heart was in the right place. Well, he's had it repaired since, but it was mostly in the right place. but look, the thing is, this leads me to one of the great conundrums that I've always wondered about, and that is, why do bad things happen to good people? Now, I look around at the sort of people that exist in this world, and I see criminals, hardened criminals who have done all sorts of nasty things, who are in jail. They live for a very long time. They live a very healthy life. They never get sick. And then people who have gone out of their way to do the right thing and help other people, like Suresh, ends up having cancer and a heart attack and all this stuff that just should not happen. If there was any justice in this world, it wouldn't have happened to Suresh.
It's the roll of the dice, isn't it? I mean, and without it, Jace, think of all the songs that would never have been written, or only the good die young.
But look, can I just add one thing, and something you said earlier as well, Pete, and there's something that probably Richard could comment on. We talked in terms of that original sin, the fact that we're born with sin and you're forever working, repenting that sin, etc. I'm currently dealing with a matter at Joondalup Hospital where a mother went in to have her baby, her first baby, and they were going to induce the baby, and they injected her and put in the balloon catheter and so on, and they then left her for 4.5 hours, and when they came back, the baby was dead.
Oh God.
Now, how do you deal with that whole thing around original sin there? Where is the original sin? Where is the idea that so is the mother having that sin pass it on to the baby? I have no idea. I just So it's very hard for me to be devout in, when I'm dealing with things like that, the taking of an innocent life, as I see it, and that's something that I find really, really hard to come to terms with. And recent years I've dealt with Aishwarya and a couple of others in their similar sort of position. There's a story on ABC this morning again, where a baby came very close to dying, it was just something that I'm dealing with again there. So I find it really hard to come to terms with why do we have this concept of original sin, and how do we even rationalize that in the space of an innocent child dying.
Yeah, the difficulty, of course, and I will support both Luke and Richard, because I know who they are. There are Christian people out there who would try their damnedest to justify that as if somehow it's acceptable and it's good, it's okay, and God works in mysterious ways. Richard and Luke are not like that, and if they were, they probably wouldn't be a part of this podcast, because they are bigger than that. They're able to see things which they can quite honestly say, well, that's a conundrum, and it's a really difficult issue to get around. How do you try and justify that baby? How can you, the people that start saying, oh, this God had a plan, that just infuriates people. It's not comforting, it's not helpful, it's not an answer, it's not a resolution, it's nothing. It's just people sprouting rhetoric for the sake of it, because they really don't know how to answer it, and which is probably a good time to pass to Rich. You heard my intro, Rich. Do you want to pick it apart and agree, disagree, or what? You're not a believer of the Garden of Eden situation being literal. So what is your take? Because if you don't believe in the curse, then what is the reason for there being cancer if there's a God? Even either way, because I don't believe in it the other way. But
taking like a huge, because there's so many. There seems to be so many versions of the story in Christianity. Christianity being such a broad faith. And having these little subsects all the way through with different explanations, but at the very, I guess, at the broadest sense, the way I'd explain it is Christianity being a theistic religion, or a theistic faith, sees there is a God. So however they define it, there's a God. We tend to go more than just some absolute thing. We tend to talk about, absolute goodness, absolute love, all of that, that's where the problem comes in. Because if such a being is responsible for the world around us, surely if you look around, you'd see that existence, human life on this earth should align with that, and in so many areas it doesn't. And so that's the question. So how do you explain that? And Christianity in its sort of broad, Pastor Chase, just seeing you just change your name, well done. Thanks, Pastor. So at the broadest, Christianity makes this claim that obviously something has either gone wrong, or there's some gap between the absolute goodness of the eternal being, for want of a better word, and what we've got. There's something missing, there's some gap, there's some limitation. Okay, so, and Christianity's approached it in a whole bunch of different ways. Suresh talked about original sin, and I mean that's probably the majority Western Christian view. Catholicism and a lot of who the other mob, Protestants, Pentecostals, Evangelicals, all have gone around the same route. They have this story that everything was perfect, because God being perfect, he only creates perfect things. He gave people free will. And somehow, for some strange reason that's unclear to me, being perfect, we somehow were able to go wrong. And because of that, reality was in a sense broken. Okay. A lot of people then try to explain it with this thing called original sin, as if because of the rebellion and sin of ancestors, it just sort of rolls down through the thing, and we inherit some kind of guilt. Now, it does make some sort of perverse sense when you look at it within its system. But if you take a step back, and the claim is that because of something you never did and had no way of ever being a part of, you're somehow morally responsible. But more than that, you're actually guilty of something before you've done anything to have that guilt. That to me, that's gibberish. It confuses terms like guilt. Guilt means, the definition of guilt is an original sin. That concept of original sin is guilt that's rolled down through the generations. The definition of guilt is you've done something wrong. You can't inherit guilt.
No,
it's gibberish. And for me, I just find that whole thing nonsensical.
Mm-hmm.
I think examining my earliest Christianity, you sort of inherit it by default, so you don't examine it. But when I took a look at it early on, I was like, this just does not make sense. I've never really trucked with it, which has always put me on the periphery of my Christian experience. But nowadays I'm I'm over 40, so I'm cranky, and who cares what people think about me now? So, and so that whole concept of original sin, I do see a big segment of Christianity use that to explain it. They basically, the claim is ancestors broke something. It broke something in reality. In fact, because we were somehow given charge over all creation, because we broke something, it broke for everything underneath us, including dogs and cats and people. And it's like there's a moral attachment to it. Like, it's not just something went wrong. It's like you did something wrong and you deserve it. So this is the terrible part of the story that you don't tend to hear reach too much from the pulpit, is you deserve that cancer because you're guilty. You wouldn't hear this one preached. In fact, let me say this. Actually, I was at a funeral of a small child who died. And from the front, they said this was all a part of God's plan.
Oh.
And, because that sort of trucked with the family's belief system, and it was in some, I don't know, bizarre way, it did comfort, I guess, because at least there was some explanation. But I just had to bite my lip and just weep internally. That on top of losing your own child, you had to now sort of lay the blame at some cosmic monster that you had to somehow say you loved, even though he hurt you so bad. It was a terrible experience. And I think it was that event sealed my fate as far as that whole belief system. So as far as accounting for cancer and suffering, somehow that we deserve it because of original sin, yeah, I do know Christians who say that. It's a big part of Catholicism. It's a big major thing, but it's not the sole Christian explanation. So later on, I'll talk about what I actually do believe, but just referencing what Suresh was talking about, it's a monstrous doctrine that actually does real harm to people.
Oh, it's the ugliest side of Christianity that you can get. I think you can't get any more perverse than that. It is. I just want to backtrack a little bit, Suresh. You talked about talking about with people as a side issue with illness and stuff. I had coffee and breakfast with a young man called Isaac Roberts, who is the CEO of a radio station, which I've just become a part of the board, called Youth Jam.
Youth Jam. Yep.
Cool.
Youth Jam. And we talked about all sorts of things, but the thing that we mainly focused on was our health issues and the battles that you put up with when you're working, and radio is no different. So that was quite interesting, and it was fabulous because he's 21, I'm 67, and yet we still had so much common ground with what was wrong, and I was able to then share with him stuff that he was going through now as a young man that I had gone through back in the 70s, and had learnt a lot of ways to deal with stuff like anxiety and panic attacks and all sorts of stuff like that. And it was fantastic. And at the end of it, we just felt so good and knew so much more about each other, and you have a sense of respect and understanding about what I see on the outside is not what's going on inside the person. And it gives you that step up to actually have a compassion for other people, because there's no one I've ever met in my life who doesn't have issues that are disturbing or scary. We all do. That's a part of the human experience. It's also another stack on top of the disbelief that there can be a loving, caring God to look after us and make everything nice, because I see an absence of that, if anything. And Rich, I was going to ask you a challenging question. It's impossible to understand what we're talking about, marrying God and cancer together. Are you the sort of person who, in the back of your mind, is prepared to say, I know it's impossible because it doesn't seem true? It doesn't seem, if I want to look for a reason why this doesn't marry, are you prepared to say it could be because there's no such thing as God? Is that an option for you, or do you have a toy with that?
No, that's when I was thinking about the topic of this session together, out of all of the things I think about God and belief and faith and reality, and then when you get into philosophy, ontology, and how does this whole thing hang together? And there's all these interesting conversations you can have and interesting experiences. But when you get to the reality of suffering, this is, for me, is the, I'll say it this way. I remain very unconvinced by most arguments against theism. I'm like, yeah, okay. In the same way that you, Rowie, on the other side, I've remained very unconvinced until you reach this one, the reality of suffering. That is the strongest thing. And when I think about it, I would say it is the only thing that's convinced me that has any real weight that really impacts all of my thinking. And I'd say there's probably 5 to 10 minutes every day where I become an atheist. You just go, this can't be. This is incredibly in your face. And I think if you don't have that experience, you're doing one of a few things. You're just ignoring the question, sticking your fingers in your ears and humming, and oblivious to the suffering around you. Or you don't actually understand the question. Like you don't understand the question because the only logical response is to go to question this whole thing. So as far as that goes, it doesn't tend to stick though, and that's weird to me because it sticks for others in very similar backgrounds and experiences that I've had. They face the same question, and so I go, I wonder what that is about. But for me, it doesn't remove my faith, but it certainly humbles it to an incredible degree. And I do have moments, or maybe even days, of atheism. So,
should it be that way though? For if you sign up to something that you believe is 100% true, how does that fit in with your person, with your humanity? How if that challenge, and you assume that you're never going to have an answer on why cancer and God coexist, you're never going to have an answer. So do you assume that this is how you're going to feel for the rest of your life and never actually be able to get to a place where you go, right, now I get it. The only other option to get to that point is to say, I'm done. I cannot convince myself. I can't convince myself that this is real, and I should have to battle yourself without having God going, you know what, this is ridiculous. There are people like Richard, a good man who loves me dearly. It's about time I actually let him off the hook and said, okay, here's the deal. But that's never forthcoming or even fifth coming. You know, it's not.
Well, I won't go too far into the weeds, but maybe it's the good picture of it is this whole discussion. There's no absolute clincher. Otherwise, everybody with a brain would be one way or the other. However, you have very, very incredibly smart, thoughtful, sensible people on all ends of it, because there's no closed answer to this thing. There's no definite proof one way or the other. So for me, it's like I've got this scales. If it's, let's say, does God exist, doesn't exist, and you think about things in a certain way. I think, well, you think about cosmology and how metaphysics and all that stuff, and for me, that just tips completely toward the God exists scale. I believe I understand the question right. I believe I understand the arguments to and against it, and I remain incredibly convinced with those arguments, and a range of.
Funny, because I'm exactly the same in the opposite way.
Yeah. With that, see, that's strange to me, but so that's my experience, and then we talk about human experience in a philosophical sense. How can intellect be possible? How can love be possible? How can choice? And for me, an answer that talks about an eternal realm seated in the mind of God tips it that way. But then you start talking about other things, and they sort of balance it. And the reality of suffering and evil really sort of balances it a little bit more. But it always tends, on the whole, with what if I just look at one thing, if I just looked at cosmology, I'd be like 100% convinced. There's no question. But I live in the world in suffering, and so that brings a balance to it. But on the whole, I tip towards theism against non-theism, for want of a better word, and that's where I'm at now. So I wouldn't foreclose a future that I don't have belief, because that would be just foolishness.
It just seems a stretch to me, Rich, to go, I don't understand necessarily why that thing is the way it is, so I'm going to say there's an invisible sky wizard. It kind of, where does that come from? It's like, I don't believe in pink elephants, down the end of the garden there. I can't prove they exist, but they very well might exist. And it's those pink elephants that are keeping the yellow giraffes away from my house. And I've never seen a yellow giraffe at my house. So it's clearly those pink elephants that are doing a great job. I've got no proof they exist, but the fact there's no yellow giraffes at my house is evidence that I've got pink elephants at the end of my garden. You know what I mean? It's kind of like there's a story that's being created that is, people are able to kind of justify and rationalize. But at the end of the day, my question is, why? Why do we need this story? It's almost irrelevant to the existence of the vast majority of the human species.
Yeah, no, look.
Obviously, you're simplifying the story a lot, and
there's a lot more to the pink elephants. You're right.
Yeah,
I was going to say, to be fair on Jace though, what I call folk Christianity, that's. It's not too far away from the truth for some people. Yet,
absolutely.
Yet that story, as far as I see Christianity, is not even. It has no bearing on it. Like, none of that even reflects to sort of my version of it, I guess. So yeah, it's not like I have these moments of atheism, I would call it, because I'm convinced that the reality of suffering proves there isn't a God. But unless you're some kind of psychopath, it cannot not impact you. It can't shake you to the core and question it. I'll say this one thing. So how do I go without sort of just believing it with no reason? What is the reason? The closest I can come at the moment is that what we see, all of the what we would call evil and suffering is obviously, if you're trying to talk about it in reference to an eternal goodness, there has to be, because there's a gap, there's a distance, there's a lack of participation in that. So that's that piece. But then why is it this way? How can a good God allow such a thing to go on? And the only answer that is in any way intellectually possible, as far as I'm concerned, is some version of the greater good, is that what we see now will someday be better. I don't think you can come up with any other answer that is doesn't.
I've got a couple.
Doesn't end up in a Christian sort of theodicy, I guess, a Christian point of view, that doesn't end up in sort of nonsense somewhere along the line, you know.
Can I suggest a couple?
Yeah, go for it.
How about, so I keep getting told by Christians that it's all about the New Testament now, and that the Old Testament is the old God, that we don't deal with that God anymore. What if we do deal with that God? What if the Old Testament God is still the real God, and all this retribution, an eye for an eye, and all this kind of stuff, and making people, accusing people of being guilty of things, punishing people? The Old Testament was all about that. I've got 2 books here. Maybe there's more truth to the Old Testament. Okay, let's put that to one side. What if humans, after all, aren't anything special? What if God does exist, and there are millions of different species on millions of different planets all around the universe? We are nothing special. We're just another animal that happens to be intelligent. So we get cancer because we're nothing special. We're just like other animals that have DNA that's susceptible to actually going wrong. That, to me, if I was to be a believer in some sort of God, that sounds far more rational, because I can think that, we're nothing special. It's only the Bible that tells us that we're God's children.
Mm. Yeah, look, it's as good as any other.
Then you wouldn't
argument.
be a Christian. So I'll just say this one thing. That said, I agree with you. The reason we do get cancer is because we're animals and DNA, and so I don't see that in conflict with a Christian belief. And I think if you don't have that in your explanation, you're sort of, I don't know, you're off with the fairies or the pink elephants. I don't know.
One of the things you will discover, Jace, as we go through, is that the thing that makes Richard and I dare say Luke unique in my experience of Christians, well, it's actually not as Christians, I would say, is that I reckon 95% of Christian people would never get to the place where they're prepared to say what Richard is saying, which is, I have my doubts. Because the very second people go, your faith is trembling. You doubt, you're going to become a backslider. And a backslider is a horrible term used by Christians of people which get away with it.
Maybe Christian's the wrong name then. It's the wrong name for it. Christian might be the wrong name for it. I mean, Rich is a believer. He believes that there is an entity, something bigger. But does that necessarily mean all of the stories that are in the Bible are part of that belief structure? Do they have to be a part of that belief structure?
Well, no. His focus is on the character
without believing in the Bible.
A Christian is a wayward term often that atheism is also applicable to the opposite.
Yeah, it's true.
Because Richard's and Luke's life and belief is the character of Christ. And as soon as you label someone as a Christian, what you then cop is all of the crap that goes from the Catholicism and everything. You get lumbered with all of that because you're a Christian, which is why I hate saying I'm an atheist, because then it boxes you into a one-dimensional character like every other atheist, and that simply does not exist.
Really,
I simply
you're
say I'm not belief.
And here's the thing I guess I wanted to get to. there is a massive similarity between an atheist like me and Rich, because
Absolutely.
we both believe there is something. I don't believe the Bible and all of the stories about the divinity and the Trinity and all. I just don't believe in that. But do I think that there is a possibility that there is a greater intelligence, a greater consciousness, that the universe may actually be a conscious entity of itself, which could also be defined as God?
Mhm.
Yep.
Yeah, I do. I really
Yep.
do. I just don't believe in all of the creation myths and
Well,
the stories, the stuff that I see as being made up.
But and nor should you, because this is one of the discussions we had earlier on this podcast, Jace. You're 100% correct, because Richard is a Christian because he was born in Perth. At the beginning, the nuts and bolts of it all is it to do with where you are born. You're
Geography.
subjected to and exposed to the religion of the country, and in Surash's circumstance, there was a multiple religions that he could have gone with. In Australia,
Kind of
it's
applies to
very different
refugees
from
as
the
well,
rest
doesn't
of
it?
the world. But we are very much the American model of modern day Christianity. If you take the geographical out of it, that to me exposes the whole ridiculousness of saying Christianity, the religion of Christianity is better than Hinduism, and it's better than Jainism, it's better than Buddhism, it's better than all of those. We've got the only right one. Even the Quran, which states that it's the last book, that they make that statement. Not important, say the Christians. We are the right one. We're the only right one.
Can I ask
That's what makes the
Suresh?
whole thing ridiculous.
My knowledge of Hinduism obviously isn't as extensive as yours,
Hmm.
but in Hinduism and any other religions that I guess you know a lot about, is it so? If we were to put the Christian story, the fairy tale aside, and talk about what the religion is ultimately about, and that's believing in a creator, in a divine entity
Yep.
that is the creator, is that a common thread through other religions like Hinduism?
Oh, look, very much so. Hinduism, though, Hinduism is very much more about a way of life. You know, it's not about prescribing rules. It's not about talking about original sin, and it's not based on punishment and penance for wrongdoing. It's about doing the right thing because you'll come back in a higher form. So it's very much focusing on the positive aspects of your life and asking you to do good. Whereas I find, and again, you know, I emphasize that my knowledge around Christianity is very much based on a childhood learning aspects of the Bible, but it really is about being punished, undertaking penance for sins you may have undertaken or whatever. So I find that that's the essential difference that I find between Eastern and Western religions. But I think that it still has that divine creator. In the case of Hinduism, it's a variety of different gods for different aspects of your life. So you know, you go to Kali, could be the god of death, and you know, various Lakshmi is someone else, and so on and so forth. You see, so there's a variety of but it comes back to saying, rather than having the one divine creator, you have a number of gods addressing various aspects of your life, because Hinduism's about your way of life. It's not about one eternal being, one omnipotent being, and omnipresent being. So, and yet, and the point you make there, Jace, is really good. I mean, one of the keenest followers of Christianity was, in fact, Mahatma Gandhi. Even though he was a very devout Hindu, you know, right to quite extreme case lengths, but he always believed that Christ was a being, and he implored all Christians to be like Christ, rather than follow the Bible.
Yeah.
So yeah, so he did believe in that. He accepted that there was a divine creator in other religions, but it did not necessarily impact on his way of life, which was governed by a variety of different creators or aspects, divine beings in each aspect of his life. So yeah, look, it's and that I think is the real, and for a number of reasons, Hinduism then became very popular in the 60s for Christians who were looking for something other than a didactic, dictatorial document like the Bible. Let's go and find somewhere that's just got a way of life, and that's why the
Hippies.
Beatles and everyone else went there
That's
looking
right.
for, yeah,
Peace and love and flower power and all of that stuff.
all of that
And
stuff.
absolutely, Hinduism comparatively, I think, is in essence more beautiful and understanding and forgiving, and it doesn't have an Old Testament that you can revert back to of there being a horrible God. Good time to mention, if you are listening to us live right now on Facebook or watching us, we do apologize. We're just four Aussie blokes. I mean, actually, I said this while you're away. Do you consider are you an Aussie bloke, Suresh? Have you done the whole thing?
Oh
Have you
yeah,
been circumcised Australian?
absolutely. But there was a minor problem, because when I came here, I was actually stateless. So I had to, I hadn't, I'd given up my Singapore citizenship when they asked me to come back and do national service. And being the total pacifist I am, I said, "Nah, thanks, guys. Here's your citizenship back." And I hadn't lived in India long enough to get citizenship there, so they let me come here on a travel document that said that I was stateless. So I had to take some citizenship, and yeah, Australian came up in 3 years' time, and I grabbed it. So,
Beautiful. We are the benefit of that, mate. So
Yeah,
fantastic.
absolutely.
Time
I'm
to
actually not a
jump on.
proper Australian either.
No, I know. Well, you're Welsh, but that's different. You were
oh,
Well,
born
my parents
here.
got naturalized when I was a
Yeah.
child, so that meant I got automatically. I became a citizen.
became
Yeah.
citizen,
But
yeah.
I don't know. It's one of those tough times, when the rugby's on. I don't know who to support.
Don't watch it. It's a rubbish game anyway.
Yeah.
Fenton has touched base with us, one of our regular contributors on this podcast. G'day, Fenton. How are you? Lovely to have you on board. I've forgotten. We did find out where Fenton was from, but I can't remember. But Fenton, what's your view on this whole thing? You've contributed a lot to this podcast. How do you sit as far as your experience goes in trying to understand, if there is a God, how can cancer exist? If there is a God, how can there be children's hospitals? If there is a God, the question goes on and on and on. So yeah, let us know. If you're out there, anyone else, wherever you are in the world, love to have you a part of our podcast. You'll see the space next to your YouTube or Facebook post, and you can chuck a comment, a question, whatever. Jason, I want to ask you, what conversations go regarding faith, Christianity, whatever, with family and friends who are perhaps suffering from cancer? Is that a conversation that you're familiar with, that happens regularly? Or
It's interesting how you move in different circles and how we all have different groups of friends who have different values and beliefs. Because I would say that in my circle of colleagues and friends, only one of them is an overt, practicing, out there Christian. There may be others that have that belief, but they certainly don't talk about it. It's certainly not an issue that's discussed, and something that is never brought up. I occasionally hear of some of them saying that something happened at church sometimes, but it's almost like Christianity, or at least being religious enough to go to church, has become a bit like smoking. You become a little bit of a social pariah. And you don't want that discussion. You don't want that debate with people. It's like, oh, are you still a believer? You just don't want that, because you don't want to be challenged on your beliefs, I guess. And I completely understand where that's coming from. you know, they often say that there are three things that you should never discuss.
Yes.
You know, political matters, religious matters, and sexual matters.
Mhm.
I'm the sort of person that will discuss any of those things. I really don't care. And I try not to do it in a confrontational kind of way. But
Rubbish.
I am a
Yeah, I
curious
don't believe
person.
that at all.
I don't believe that for a second.
Honestly, I'm a curious person. That is one of the reasons I worked at 6PR as a talkback presenter, because I naturally like to ask questions and find out more and probe, and sometimes ask those uncomfortable questions, not to be confrontational, but simply because they're the sort of question that everybody wants asked, but no one's willing to ask
Absolutely.
the question in the first place. So
Yeah.
I'll very often ask that question. You know, one of the things that I will do, and Suresh may have actually seen me do this,
Mhm.
if I enter a room, or, you know, I'm in an environment where there is a person who might be very disabled, one of the first things I will do is go to that person and have a chat with them. And
Yeah.
if I think it's appropriate, I'll ask them the question, what happened? What is the reason for your circumstances? You know,
Yeah.
because I think, again, it's one of those situations where no one ever wants to ask the question
Correct.
because it's
That's right.
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I think people want to talk about that sort of stuff. And this goes back to what Suresh was saying about talking about health issues.
Mm.
And even to an extent, and I know I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but it's one of my big soapbox things, suicide. Now,
Yep.
I know that's a really touchy area, and so it should be. But the fact that we in the media are basically completely excluded from being able to
Yes.
talk about suicide. There is a
Mhm.
curtain, there is a veil, and we are instructed by the people who provide advice to us, do not bring it up, do not talk about it. And if there is
Mm.
something that has happened, if someone has suicided, you call it an event, you know,
Yes,
a
that's
police
right.
event, or a
Mm.
media. Anyway, I can't remember the terminology, but
No, I know what you mean. Yeah.
it's so
Police. There's an
frustrating.
incident, a police incident on
Incident,
the
that's the word.
narrow bridge.
It is so frustrating to not be able to talk about something that is so important. So important. I mean, if having that conversation can stop one person from trying to take their life, then that's important. But we get told, oh, no, you can't talk about it because someone then might copycat or emulate.
Yeah.
And that,
Yeah.
oh man, that makes me angry. But just going back to what Suresh said, just to close the circle, talking about illnesses, talking about uncomfortable things, I think is absolutely crucial. And I just wish I could encourage more people to do it.
Yeah, good
Yeah,
on you, Jason.
Domestic violence is the same. It's the hidden taboo.
Absolutely.
And the only way that these things are improved or lessened in severity is by discussing it and making it something that everyone is aware of. We all know that there's people who suicide. We all know there's domestic violence, you know, rife in our communities.
But it's on us, Pete. It's on us.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
we
Oh,
know
mate,
that a mate or somebody is guilty of domestic violence, it's on us, right? That doesn't go to the police necessarily.
No.
We should be challenging that. You know, as uncomfortable as it is, if I knew somebody who I knew had hit their wife or hit their husband, I
Yeah.
would be having words with them, because that's
Absolutely.
not acceptable.
Yeah. And the beautiful thing about doing podcasts in this modern age is that we are not controlled or censored by anyone. We can talk about those issues until someone attempts to stop it, which I can't imagine would happen. So
You get
yeah,
blocked
look,
on YouTube.
yeah, that's true. But we love YouTube. We love you. Fenton has responded. That's right. Fenton's from California. California. Fantastic. Original sin was the idea that I couldn't digest as a Christian. Yeah, it always was a problem and became the ultimate reason I discovered epistemology and then atheism. Yeah, it's not an unusual story, Fenton. I think many of us have walked down that path. Again, though, without original sin, In Excess would not have had one of their biggest hits. So, we've got to be grateful
And I
for
don't know
small
about
mercies.
epistemology, but epistemology is, I've been studying that for a long time, the study of
Yeah,
beer and alcohol and
that's it.
excessive.
Absolutely. And Fenton's probably going, who or what was In Excess? Although we're one of the biggest bands in America. So if you're from California and you're around about our age, you may very well have heard of In Excess. Yeah, so interesting discussion, and as is always the path we tread when we talk about this is that it's just so hard to get some sort of understanding, and my issue is always, if we simply cannot work out why, then you have to ask the question, well, why is it so hard? Why isn't it something that we should all know and understand? But then you can join that together with every question about the universe and life and why we're here. We will invariably go to our graves really not knowing more questions than answers, that you just never got a point where you felt satisfied. And I felt like that as a Christian of 25 years. I had the answers. There was nothing else to look for.
But what's the common thread, Rowie? The common thread between all religions is that there's no proof.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. And yet, without proof, two things happen. Some people continue to believe, and some people go, I can't do this anymore. It's illogical for me as an intelligent human being to believe in something without any proof whatsoever. If there was just a couple of segments missing.
Just show me.
Yeah, but see, now Rich would have Richard would have a great answer for that. Is that, and I respect where he's got to in that, is that that's not a question we should necessarily be asking because of the character of God or because of his understanding of where he's at. And he's explained it to me, and I can't articulate it as well as what he's, but it's not necessarily something we should have to know the answer to. And I don't accept that. That just does my head
obviously.
in. That's sheer bloody mindedness.
Yeah. Well, it's because you're not enlightened like I am. But that aside, yeah, exactly. No, I was going to. Just
I wasn't having a go at you, by the way, Richard. I was
I know you're defending me, but I was having a go at Jace really, because he would take it, and you were defending me, so we're on the same side with that one. But no, I was just going to say it's interesting especially when Fenton was talking about
original sin.
One of the things that sort of levered him out of Christianity was original sin and led him to atheism. It's quite interesting that the first Christians were actually called atheists in the Roman Empire because they didn't believe in the whole panoply of gods. They were called atheists, and it's interesting because depending on how you define Christianity, I call myself an atheist to that. Like there's hardcore Calvinism. If you don't know it, don't look it up. You don't want to be studying.
You don't want to be a Calvinist. No.
But if Calvinism is called Christianity, well, I'm an atheist because there is nothing redeemable in it. It's a monster god with an incoherent belief system, and it's an intellectual non-starter for me to talk about divine meticulous control of the universe, which is God is in control of every little thing, to the point that every dust mote flying in the atmosphere is controlled by God. As soon as you go into divine meticulous,
if he's in control of everything and everything is predestined, what's the point?
Well, then there's no such thing as rational thought then, because every spin of the neuron and firing is already preordained. There's no such thing as rational thought. So you just stop talking. It's a intellectual non-starter for me.
Yeah.
So there's those sorts of things. 100% atheist. There's nothing redeemable in that kind of hardcore atheist, a hardcore Calvinism. So I'm an atheist to that. And it's interesting because, Jace, you say you're an atheist. I say I'm a Christian. And yet I think the Venn diagram of our beliefs are quite common, which is interesting because probably your version of atheism and my version of Christianity is probably spelt with a capital Human, humanity. And I think that's quite telling about the discussions we have here quite often. But yeah, so I just wanted to get on my little soapbox about atheism. There are a few Christians, and a few Christians will watch this afterwards, because I know for a few of our regular viewers have the kids home and stuff like that, so they'll be watching recordings. But for the Christians, people say, how can atheism and doubt is the enemy of Christianity? Well, it isn't. One of the most common prayers that every Christian will know is, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." Yeah, okay. We name God. We say, "Our Father who is in heaven." So we give him a name. And then immediately afterwards, we unname him. "Hallowed be thy name," which basically means holy, separate, different. So
hallowed.
In the very act of Christians, from the beginning, in the very act of naming our God, we unname him. We say, yes, he's our Father, but don't think you know what that means. His name is holy, separate. It's different to us. There's something. So, even within the circle of Christianity, from the very beginning, is this tendency toward atheism inbuilt, where we believe, but we don't know it all. Studying the early Christianity and the early philosophy around it, it looks quite different to a lot when I grew up in Sunday school, that's for sure. Which means that I'm maybe an atheist to most Christians,
Right.
but I own my Christian label because I think it's worth redeeming. I think the philosophy of Christianity is worth redeeming.
Yeah,
and there's some stuff around that. So it's interesting about this whole discussion. And that's why it's really strange where you say we're on a podcast called An Atheist Believer and a Pastor walk into a bar and we all end up sort of on the same side. I think it's because that dynamic.
I have to apologize. I've just discovered something that I didn't know. So you just said the Lord's Prayer there, and you see, I understood that God's name was Harold, because I always thought that the prayer was,
"Harold be
Our
thy
Father
name,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." Easy enough mistake to make. Sorry, Harold.
Jesus Harold Christ. Is that what it is?
Jesus H. Christ. That's exactly right.
That's what I thought.
Oh, it's going to be a long night. I can just tell.
Okay, we've got a new rule. From now on, it's Jason or I, because if we get together, it just sends into insanity.
Look, he wants to be the pastor. Just let him be the pastor. So, Suresh, what's the perfect scenario for you? And are you there as far as not feeling an obligation to belong to a club, to accept 100% the teachings, the belief, the history? Are you in a place in your life where you are where you're meant to be? You don't have all of the answers. You're gracious enough to be able to say, there are stuff and things that I don't know about. I don't have the answers to everything. Pope Jazz.
Yeah.
Anyway,
What?
ignore.
I forgive you.
Rich, you got say over all of these screens.
Look, all I can say is you and Jace, you and your mates get your stuff and get out of here.
So being serious for a moment, Suresh, where are you? What's that content place that you're at?
Look, I have being in the space that I am, where I spend most of my time advocating diverse religious beliefs, advocating diverse cultural beliefs, etc. I've rationalized everything in my mind to understand that whilst I may choose not to believe I will defend everyone else's right to believe what they want to. So I'm very, very comfortable in that space. So I'm not going to. I may deny the existence of this eternal being in my life, but I'm not going to deny it in the life of Richard or Jason or whoever, and someone who believes that Allah is going to be that person that is going to be the eternal being, the creator, or whichever Hindu god or whatever. I look at it and come back to that humanist and that humanism that we talked about earlier. My humanism says that I am concerned for that person as a human, and if his version of his humanism requires him to have a support structure built around a church, a temple, a synagogue, terrific. If that's what makes him feel good, then I will advocate for his right to have that support structure, just as I would advocate for the right of a disabled person to have a disability support worker, etc., etc. So I'm very, very comfortable in understanding that whilst I choose not to believe, I will defend the right of everyone else to have their own self.
There's
Are
that
you
hook
on-
line that I've always stood by that says, it doesn't have to happen to you for it to matter to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So what's exciting for me and talking to all you guys and what we have done over the last, 16 episodes or whatever, is that you can find a place without uniformity that you're comfortable with. You can be generous, you can be loving, you can be caring, you can be a lovely, caring, good person without then going, oh, well, then I probably should sign up to some religion or some cult or whatever, so that there's more of a purpose. So because purpose to me is a huge word. We don't talk about it enough, probably. That what is our purpose? If my purpose is to be good, then I don't need to be a part of a group that causes division and confusion and hypocrisy and all of that kind of stuff, cruelty. I need to find
a lot of depression comes from that, Pete.
a
lot of depression
mate,
comes from the fact that people don't have purpose and direction.
couldn't agree more. Absolutely. It's not something that is beneficial to us as human beings. And to me, the experience is what it means to be human, what it means to be a human being. And I think that the sooner we get rid of all of the man-made religiosity and the stuff that weighs us down and causes confusion, I'd rather say, you know what, we don't need a podcast anymore, because we're all cool with what we're doing and who we are. And I just find that every time we try and marry up the complexities of faith and religion, it's exhausting. It really is, and it's not healthy. And we will not reach a point where we all kind of say, yep, look, I agree. I think what you're saying is 100% right. Let's just all be free and happy. Let's become hippies and live on a commune and experience the love and the joy. It's
sounds good.
What
Where
do
do
you
I
think,
sign?
Rick? Yeah.
But
that's
Peter,
the problem. You don't have to sign anywhere, do you? Really? Sorry,
but
sorry.
That's based around not necessarily having to subscribe to a religion, etc.
Of course.
It also comes with potentially great disappointment. When you're sitting there and you're advocating something that is so rational, yet someone's religious beliefs will counter that rational thing that you see, that humanist principle you see, and it can frustrate you to buggery and cause you great dissatisfaction when you literally are just about ready to choke them and say, can't you get off that religious high horse for a moment while you adopt my humanist rational principle? It's so am I always satisfied? No, but I'm satisfied in 80% of the time. I can get to where I want to. There's a hardcore element, irrespective of religious belief, that will not shy away from their religious principles in order to achieve humanist principles, and that's a difficult space. That one.
That's a good question. Which
matters before human matters. Yeah,
we can talk each one about that, and you said 80%. So, Rich, in your journey, do you have a sense of what percentage? And I know it's hard to, rate from 0 to 10. Are you totally satisfied with your journey and the outcome that you anticipate and stuff? Or you 80%, 30%, 40%? What? How do you feel in yourself about where the journey you're on?
Yeah, look, it's funny because on one hand you can, and I think it's probably not a particularly Christian experience, maybe it's just human experience, but the longing for a simpler past. Like when you were younger, it felt like everything sort of made a lot more sense. And it seems to be a fairly common experience. So that sort of nostalgic hope for it. And, it's very tempting to go back into a second naivety where you just sort of get to the edge, look into the abyss and shrug your shoulders and just walk away from it. I can't do that. So, however, it was like really good until it wasn't. Being a Christian in a Pentecostal swing from the chandeliers church was really good until it isn't. And then it get really bad. And funnily enough, on the other end of the dip, I'm actually far more satisfied in a very deep way. It feels like I've got less of my questions answered, but there's a depth to my being that's a lot more satisfied because now I'm not dancing to a drum that's beaten by somebody else. I feel very comfortable pursuing a very authentic way of being. And for me, my authentic way of being involves my faith. And it's like, well, yeah, I can see a lot of sociological reasons for that, yet none of it explains it all to my satisfaction away. So I'm like, okay. So I hold it in an open hand, yet you'll have to do a lot of work to explain a lot of stuff that I've been through that, without some sort of divine principle. So I think I'm probably more satisfied now, and yet I'm less quote unquote Christian, and yet far deeper in my faith. In fact,
so I
personally would categorize it far deeper Christian. So I'm probably like an 8 or a 9.
Okay.
But there's got to be a different name for what you are, Rich.
Well, I know.
Humanist.
Yeah, it's not far from it.
That's something you can share with the character of Christ as a humanist and as you are in your own rights. I mean,
you don't have to believe in a divinity to actually have the morals and the overall ethical belief structure that you've got. I think we've touched on this in a previous podcast, but the stuff that you believe is very similar to the stuff I believe, and Pete and Suresh.
Yes,
but we don't have that belief in the divine. Yep. So how is it that we're so similar? We have this Venn diagram that overlaps so much.
But and Jace, do you know what I understand? I don't think Rich will agree with this, but it actually adds nothing whatsoever to your destination, whether you believe in the divinity or not. It's not going to make any difference unless you believe that you're going to stand at the gates of heaven and God's going to say, okay, here's the deal,
Peter,
mate. I've been watching you, and you just I've seen what you've done. Don't you try and pretend anything like that. If you believe in that garbage that you're going to explain yourself to God one day, then sure,
I know what
fill out
websites you go to.
out all the forms properly. But for Richard, I don't think that applies. I think that he's under no pretense that his walk is his walk. It's different from everyone else. I kind of get that. I think he's committed to discovering his truth. He's not there yet, and he may never get there yet. But either way, you can throw all of that stuff out the window, and it doesn't make a blind bit of difference to you as a human being on your walk through life till you die. Nothing. You're not going to be
But
punished.
as a curious human being, I want to grill Rich, not because I want to criticize him, but because I genuinely want to know where does it come from? What's the source of this? What's the rationale?
Great question.
Answering the why. It's like we have a very similar belief structure, but for some reason there is a story constructed around yours, and there's a sense of external attribution rather than internal attribution. So I don't there's nothing I attribute externally to myself. I take responsibility for absolutely everything.
Yep.
That's a
that
very
perhaps
good
is
point.
the only real difference that I can see.
That is a really good point, Jace. It is internal as opposed to external. That's brilliant, because then you can be good at what you do and actually say, you know what, I'm good at this. I don't need an external to be great. Rich?
Well, when I was thinking about this, the question often goes, okay, it's as if the problem of suffering, evil, etc., in the world is a unique problem for theists. It's a problem for everyone. It's a massive problem. We've explored it, but let's flip the script a little bit. I'd wonder, for me, if I were to say there is no divine principle, literally, it's a materialist universe. There's nothing beyond what we see, experience in this world. I would have to conclude several things about the reality of suffering, which is suffering, evil, destruction is part of the fabric of reality, because it seems so pervasive, and there's no escape from it. It's like
I don't know that it's evil. I think it's
you would have to redefine evil from a traditional one. So that's why I tend to use the word suffering.
Suffering there is an absence of natural justice.
There's nothing that will save you. There's nothing that will redeem it. Children are going to be sick and die, and it's just this is reality. For me, looking down deep into that abyss is pretty darn scary. And my problem philosophically is most people don't live as if that's like the true universe, because then they talk about purpose and meaning, and even to the trite sort of everything happens for a reason, and it's like, well, not really. There's no purpose, there's no meaning. I think suffering has it twists the knife into nihilism for me, which I don't think people generally deeply wrestle with the implications of that.
So maybe then the entire, if you want to call it purpose, the entire purpose is the wrong word. I think the best way that we can experience the situation that we're in is love. And I know that sounds trite. I know it sounds trite, but it's caring about other people and sharing and being with people that you care about. That, as I see it, is the only real, tangible purpose that we could possibly have.
See, this is strange, because language trips us up. Love defined as that, which is just sort of relationship with the other, great, but you can't use the word purpose, really, could you? It's really strange. We use all of these words that hang on to, in our traditional usage of it, hang on to some sort of absolute divine source. And it's really interesting. I think if we try to talk in such a way without reference to some sort of eternal divine source, we'd have to invent a whole bunch of new terms. Like purpose is not a purpose, as most people understand it, is not quite what you mean when you're talking about purpose without eternity, or meaning. Meaning isn't something that's intrinsically meaningful. It's something that you impose upon it in the confines of your own mind. And
Sure.
that's not what most people mean when they say meaning. They actually mean there's something significant outside of myself, outside of even my existence. So this is, for me, I think most people who would say they're atheists haven't really considered what it means in the face of suffering. They act and walk through their day as if there's some eternal significance to their life, and yet there's nothing.
What we call
nothing
first-person character syndrome.
of suffering
Yeah.
that you try to ameliorate with some kind of kindness with the other, but that's just a choice you make to hopefully make it a little less horrific.
Oh,
And that's
yeah,
the
but this
best
comes
that we can
all
do.
the way back full circle to that idea that we've got of treat others how you want to be treated, or the one commandment, don't be a dick. That is the reason that you are nice to people, that you love people, because you hope you're going to get some of that back. And if for me there is no other meaning, no eternity, all I can hope for is to feel as good as I can while I can. And the way that I do that is by giving what I want back.
Yeah. And so for me, that's the best you can hope for. And I'm like, okay, most people don't live their lives with that implications of the reality of suffering. They act as if the reality of suffering is only for those dumb Christians, and they haven't looked under their own chair, so to speak. So I'm like, I don't think Christians or theists have a good answer. I think it's the only argument against theism that holds any water for me, to tell you the truth, and it's a significant thing, but the sword cuts both ways.
Let's
Jace,
just jump in and have a look at some posts. And if you are watching us live, we're sort of probably, 10, 15 minutes away from wrapping up for this Wednesday night. Where you are, it may not be Wednesday night, of course, but that's okay. You might want to send us a comment or question. We were originally talking about, of course, the trying to marry up. If there's a God, how can cancer exist? We've kind of been on a bit of a journey through all of the things associated with that, and it's been fascinating. But our fifth member tonight has well and truly been Fenton. Wish we had a prize.
I know.
To award for the most prolific poster. So
we need to print that shirt with the one commandment and just send it to him. I reckon that's
don't be a dick. Yeah. Let's do that. I want one of those t-shirts. Don't be a dick.
Okay. I'll work on it.
Without the image of a penis on it. I think that's important to not include that in there.
Don't
It works in our local market, Jace, but maybe California, not so much.
Yeah, true.
Fenton, while we're reading out your posts, let me ask you a question to which I hope you respond before we wrap up. Do you think that is a great commandment? Is it the only commandment we need? And would you wear a t-shirt in California, wherever you are, that said, don't be a dick?
So maybe to California-ize it, it just needs to say, be nice.
Yeah, that's and have some flowers on it or something as well.
Yeah.
Let's get to what's a dick? A dick, as in a dickhead, penis. Don't be a dick. There's another word we could use, which would be far more
Aussie.
Knob.
Aussie, yeah, knob. So Fenton says that is my big issue with religion now. The moral system has holes in it and contradictions. You're true. A secular assessment, understanding the evolution of human minds and social groups, is so much more. You're going to get a big nod from me on that. Fenton,
hey, can I just say something to that one? Fenton, I think one of the worst things about religion is it's the tendency to create it as a moral code, a moral system.
Yes.
Funny enough, my Christianity isn't a moral system.
We talked
which
about
puts
that
me at
at the
odds
last
with a
week.
lot of
didn't you?
people. So yeah, right on, Fenton.
Yep. Well done, mate. Now you got the Christians on your side, mate, so you're doing well. Unfortunately, humans have spent thousands and potentially hundreds of thousands of years in theistic adjacent communities. Well, okay, it's deep. So it's likely embedded in our brain structure for a long time. And I was actually thinking, before you put that on there, I was thinking along very similar lines, Fenton, in that, I don't know who it was that said famously, you've had 2,000 years to get it right. It's time to just let it go, because clearly, I mean, look around at every single corner of the globe and look what religion has done. Look at all the wars. Look what's going on at the moment in Palestine. I mean, my goodness gracious me, the images of those places just destroyed, the people who have done nothing to deserve it, by people who have no idea probably what they're fighting again. Again, it's a bunch of wealthy white men in their little castles dictating what's happening around the world and starting
that whole
wars.
situation, Pete, that whole situation where you're not even allowed to criticize what's going on because religion comes into it straight away. If you criticize the fact that people are getting killed, you're an anti-Semite. And how do you discuss the subject when the first accusation is you're being an anti-Semite? What?
I know. It's just,
I think suddenly that problem it manifests as it's religion is the subset of the larger problem, which is ideology.
Yes,
the sort
true.
of ideological war. And if religion's an ideology, then I'm an atheist.
Look, at the end of the day, it's a bunch of rich, privileged white men having a beef with somebody else in the same situation with no end in sight.
What you believe in or what side you're on, stop killing each other.
Yeah,
it's
simple.
And it's always the innocent people. These fat pricks who start these wars don't actually get involved on any level whatsoever. They're safe as houses. Their lives are never in danger. Children, parents,
but they make a bunch of money from it.
Destroyed.
I'm going to get the two sides and bang their heads together.
And Biden with one hand was sending more bombs over to Israel, and by the other hand saying we must find a way to stop this. We really must, people. You know, and if there's a war going on, America's got to be involved. With all due respect, Fenton, I know you're from California. I'm assuming you're an American by a native, as in being born in America. I don't know whether you're Biden or Trump. We're not going to get into that. I don't think that would be seriously ugly. We'll just go for the don't be a dick. Hey,
not if we're all on the same side.
I think we'd be okay.
I think so.
Yes, it's a very interesting discussion.
Move along. This isn't the political debate you're looking for.
No.
Move along. Whatever the Jedi
have relations with that woman. I don't even know who Monica is. Yeah. Anyway, I did write down a note which I want to bring back up again because I think it's hilarious, and that is that Jason jokingly thought that God's name was Harold. I think that's
Harold.
Bold. I think that.
That's a classic for this evening.
So, guys, let's head toward. It's 9:30 on the dot. We can go a little bit past that. How do we want to wrap up this discussion? We're all in agreement, that is for sure, that it's a sad world. It's a tragic world. It's a world full of suffering and cancer, and we all have people in our families that we know have either got cancer or who have died from it. And so it's hard to be gracious and pretend that there is some being who has the ability to stop that. And people say, you know, let's pray for Joe. He's got cancer, and in my experience, 9 times out of 10, Joe dies in spite of everyone praying. How many women do you reckon have been praying for their children in Palestine?
Yeah.
on the Gaza Strip, and you just see the properties destroyed and kids killed without getting a prayer answered from God. So it's a difficult conversation for me, having come from that background to where I am now, and struggling to try and piece it all together to make some sort of sense out of who we are and where we are and the rights and the wrongs and the weakening arguments about.
Does it have to make sense?
Sorry?
Does it have to make sense?
Well, no, I don't think it ever does. I mean, okay, so we're atheists, as you were. We're not convinced, and we're confused. Richard's a Christian, and he's still confused. So, and I don't mean that in a nasty way. I mean, by your own admission, it's a confusing. Is that the human experience in a nutshell?
If it is just evolution, Pete, if it was just
Correct.
evolution over millions of years, and we are where we are through a series of happy accidents, then it doesn't. There isn't necessarily purpose. There isn't a reason. There isn't anything other than the fact that it is.
We had an interesting one on that, Jace, a podcast. I don't know, probably going back 6-7 weeks. And I asked the guys to imagine that you're an alien looking down on Earth at every single solitary aspect of
It's a
human
bit like
life.
what Suresh looks like right now.
Looking down on us, or an alien? And it was a good experience, because it really challenged us to sit back and look at, as an outsider, looking at every aspect. So seeing everything, seeing starving children, seeing the violence, everything that happened on Earth, and then going back to their planet and saying, this is what I witnessed. And I saw people who were praying, and there was seemingly were gods, many of them all around the world, but they weren't connected. They were all separate, but they all believed that they were the right one, and there was a God. And then being questioned by the leader of the aliens, saying, does this planet look to you like a planet that is controlled by a loving, caring God? They're going, well, hell no. It looks like a dangerous planet, unstable planet, just going through the rigmarole of life on a planet with no direction and no, just an evolving species. That's what it looks like, and that's how I think that explains in a way that we can go, yes, I get it. Hey,
I have no issue with that.
No,
I actually take some solace in the idea.
Yes, me too.
And I think I've said this before, that it just is, and that what happens, and that there's no natural justice, and that when I die, and it's gone, it's over. There's some joy in knowing that what I've got right now has to be appreciated and enjoyed, and you just have to acknowledge that your current existence is everything.
Yeah, that beautifully put. I know, Suresh, you would have to agree with that.
Very much so. Yeah, make the most of what you've got now, and because that's all you've got.
And I have a sense, Rich, that also rings true with you, but in a different way, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, look, see, that's why I call it faith and hope, not certainty. All we know we have is what we've got in our hands. So make the most of it. And if your beliefs are trashing what you have in your hands for some theoretical future, there's something wrong there. But to wrap up my view of this whole question, if you're an atheist because you're convinced about some Sam Harris, is that his name, Sam Harris video you watched? I'll push back. I'll say, come on, dude, read some real books with real words in it, or watch an actual thinker. If you're thinking that Richard Dawkins' book on the selfish gene is somehow not gibberish. And look, I'll push back. I'll say, come on, that's not a sensible thing to do. But if you come to me and say, in the face of suffering, I just can't, I have to step away, I will go, absolutely. That's, to me, that is the reason why you can become an atheist without shooting your own brain out. I say that with tongue in cheek, obviously I respect a lot of people.
I hear you.
I'm overstating my case, but when it comes to suffering, the face of suffering, for me, if that brings you to the atheism, I'm like, I understand it and I appreciate it, and I think it shows at least you understand the moral question.
Why is it not enough for you, though?
Because there's all of this other stuff.
I mean, it's a very brave man that would slag off Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins in the same sentence, and yet you're willing to say, I have no answers for this, I have no evidence, cannot understand it, but
I haven't said that. I haven't said there's no evidence. The reality of suffering is not a logical, incoherent an argument against God. It's still logically possible to have suffering in a world with a good God. There is an explanation which goes along the lines of some kind of greater good, which is that you may not accept it, you may not find it convincing, but
stomach cancer because there's a greater good.
Yeah.
No, not in this world. Not in this world.
Right.
There is no other world.
The only reason why this is why it's not terribly satisfying to me. The only reason why is that somehow everything gets made right sometime, which is the Christian hope. Okay. Yep. So that's not a logical blocker. If it was like, okay, there's no way you can explain it that doesn't commit intellectual hurry-curry, I would have to conclude it. But there is, and it's wrapped up in the Christian hope. But I know if you don't find that convincing, it's not because you haven't thought deeply. It's not because you're some sort of psychopath. You actually are a morally sensitive, intelligent person. And if you conclude you can't believe in God because of that, I'll be like, I can actually understand that and appreciate it. And in fact, I'm more on your side than a whole bunch of Christians would stand, quote unquote, on my side with all these terrible explanations about that. So that's my thing. It's the weakest part of my belief system, and that's why it always hinges where I find myself 5 to 10 minutes a day. I'm an atheist because of that one question. Yet there's far more things that I have to wrestle with that point for me a cumulative evidence towards an absolute divinity.
I've got the name for it. Rich, I've got a name. I've got a name for what you are.
Oh, good.
A Teflon Christian.
God, no.
Well, because the atheism comes and it lands on you and it slides straight off again. Teflon.
Yeah. Look, I was being a bit controversial about the Dawkins and Sam Harris, but I would stand by. If you are an atheist and you wanted to have some intellectual depth to atheism, I would stop reading and watching those guys and read some actual real depth, deep atheists. I have to discover them.
Like who?
I'll go find some of the ones that I think are far worthier. Just let's just pick on, since I've opened my own can of worms, I didn't listen to much Sam Harris. So after talking to Rowie early on, I went okay, I'm going to listen to, I must have started 6 or 7 or 8 of his, these are the ones you got to watch. And without fail, I'm saying without fail, within 5 to 10 minutes of the video, Sam had misrepresented every case that he was tearing down, factual errors. And I'm just like, is this Is this the best that atheists got? Thank goodness not. So I don't think he's a popular speaker, and maybe because he's speaking to a popular audience, he has to dumb it down to the point where it's like anti-intellectual. Richard Dawkins' selfish gene is actually proven to be false by modern genetic research. Dawkins himself today, I don't know, but like the Selfish Gene book, come on, just read some modern research. He may have because the research has moved on in the last 50 years. He wrote that book operating on old stuff. So have another thought. Let's talk about some real reasons to be an atheist besides the silliness these these two Charlies.
I think the argument you've presented, Richard, gives people every reason in the world why they should listen to Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins. Because it means they're onto something because you don't agree with it, which means that they're right. Likely to be right.
No, come on. If every video that I tend to watch recommended from atheists begins with factual errors and misrepresentations,
according to who?
You can do better than that.
According to who? Who's making the judgment that they're false?
No,
they're inaccurate.
Factual errors are factual errors. They're not opinions. So when Sam Harris gets up and he says, Christians, Muslims, and Hindus all believe that God wrote their book. Okay, that's factually that's factually incorrect. It's an actual lie. It's a lie.
Well, no,
Christians
it's not
as
a lie.
whole do not claim God wrote their book. Some Christians do, but the best Christian intellectuals, the best Islamic intellectuals, the best don't say that. They say that's nonsense. That's utter nonsense.
Yeah, but you're missing the point. It's the same as Neil deGrasse Tyson.
There's other videos where he talked about historic events, factually incorrect. He got them completely wrong. They're like, Sam, that didn't actually happen, mate. We know it didn't happen because it's just a bit of a urban legend you're quoting, and I'm just like, I can't do that.
But you can pull apart every single well-known author. You can pull apart till the cows come home. It doesn't mean that the actual reason why they're saying what they're saying isn't worthy to listen to. It's like saying Neil deGrasse Tyson, his statement, blah, 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 at the beginning of our intro. He has taken information he's been given from people not like you, but Christian people, and they've said, this is the way it is. What else is he supposed to go on? I mean, I'm not saying
yeah, that's good. My problem with people like Sam Harris and those kinds of guys, they have amazing arguments against anti-intellectual Christian fundamentalism, but not the Christian thought that is 2,000 years old, the rich vein of Christian philosophy, theology, and thought. He doesn't engage in that in any ways.
They're not talking to them, Richard. They're talking to people in Pentecostal churches so that they can actually relate and connect.
Absolutely. So if you want to tear down anti-intellectual Christian fundamentalism, read all the Sam Harris you want. If you want to actually discuss God, belief, faith from a Christian point of view, you got to do better than that, is what I'm saying.
I don't think it's wise to go on anyone, and even Fenton has written, Dan Dennett, Graham Oppie, Alex Malpass, his favourite, Sam Harris and Dawkins, go outside their expertise too much. Now, that may or may not be true depending on who's watching it. So just
mate, it's true because of factual evidence. If you're making claims that aren't true.
I'm not talking about truths or untruths. I'm talking about something's only an untruth if you think you know the truth. If you're just listening,
do another episode about this
on a level,
this would be a great one.
So for me, Richard, you and I, what we're hearing with these people are completely different. I was coming out of Christianity and I needed to hear some experts talking about atheism to support my belief in what I had done. I was in no way, shape, or form in a position to determine what I was hearing was not 100% accurate, were falsification, I needed to hear stuff. And what I heard, Richard, my favorite, of course, was Christopher Hitchens. And I mean,
yeah, no, he's actually one I actually like.
yeah, well, I mean, he wrote the book How Religion Poisons Everything, and I concur 100% with that understanding how religion does poison everything, and I think it's a great book. So I took bits and pieces out of everyone. I'm not going to say I'm not going to listen to Sam Harris because I don't believe what he just said. Of course, I believe what he just said. He's a famous author and a speaker. How would I even know what he's saying isn't true? And just because he might have said a couple of things that weren't true, does that mean his entire message is gone? No, of course it doesn't. Richard Dawkins is an incredibly intelligent man. Some stuff he says, even I can hear going, Richard, come on, mate. You're a what is he? What's his actual?
Some kind of biologist?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, look, you just, of course, you're going to hear these people differently because you want them to be fake, you want them to be false, you want them to be lying, and so if you'll uncover it. Well, if you agree with everything they said, how would that support your argument?
No. What I'm asking, Sam Harris, Dawkins, etc., are good if you're escaping fundamentalism. They're probably actually quite a healthy thing to start off because you can detox of the anti-intellectual.
That's what I was doing. Exactly.
But
yeah.
If you don't transition to some more thoughtful people, you think Sam Harris has got some superstar case against theism. He doesn't even begin to approach theism. Not the great thinkers of 3,000-4,000 years of history of thinking. He doesn't engage in any of that. He looks at the very end of it and just sort of attacks that. And
but it's still valuable. It's still valuable for someone who's looking.
Yeah, look,
very valuable.
And I would backtrack on my big statement somewhat and say, yeah, listen to a bit of Sam Harris, read a bit of Richard Dawkins, escape your Christian fundamentalism, realize that that's all they're good for, and then move on to some better authors. Like Dan Dennett is actually at least he's attempting to engage in the deep philosophical questions of what it means.
Well, Dan's one of the five with Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, and Dan Dennett. I haven't heard Graham Oppie or Alex Malpass. So thank you.
I'll be interested. They're great. So awesome.
And I listened to bits and pieces and I got bits and pieces from all of them to help me understand what I was doing and whether it was right, wrong, or otherwise. Yeah. Were there any holes in it? Yes, they showed, and they're very theatrical in the way they do it, and it's a big selling point to them.
Yeah.
They are selling books. They're trying to make money. I get all that. But coming out of fundamentalism and moving into that was just a godsend.
And yeah, look, I'd agree with it. I think it's useful for that. But what I'd hope is once you've sort of detoxed is before you triumphantly declare God is dead, actually understand what the real actual case for God is. And you won't find that in Sam Harris. You'll have to go elsewhere.
But that's not his claim, Richard. His claim is not.
It is. He claims that God is dead. He claims that he is an atheist and he's killed it all.
No, I didn't say he wasn't claiming that. I'm saying he's not claiming some of the other stuff that you were talking about. It's almost a moot point to talk about these guys.
I think Jason's
their purpose is not for you.
A good alternate another episode because I think we've got some strong opinions about it.
Oh, look, we have, but it's not interesting, not to the populace, is it? I mean, sorry, Suresh, you're going to.
I'm just going to say I've got to go. I've got to bail, so I've got a few messages to get to. So
absolutely,
I'm going to, and we'll look forward to that next episode when we argue Hitchens, Dawkins, or the Bible.
And Suresh, I just got to say that my one takeaway from the
I find it quite ironic that Richard's telling us about all these authors and their falsifications and lies. Go and read the Bible if you really want some lies. That's where they are.
Sorry, Jason, you're about to say.
Good point.
I was just going to say my one takeaway from this evening,
Yep.
after everything that we've discussed, is that God smited you for being an atheist.
Oh, Richard, you're never going to
I
live
like
that
Ricky
Oh,
Gervais'
boy.
sign off is I don't want to thank God for making me an atheist. I think.
down. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Suresh. Thank you so much, mate.
Yeah.
Catch you later.
Awesome,
Cheers.
mate.
All right. And then there were 3.
But yes.
I'm going to have to go soon as
Yeah.
well. The wife called me for dinner.
Awesome. Yeah.
Mate, you need to get your dinner life together.
I know.
Fenton also mentioned
having
John
Korma.
Rawls is great. I shall check him out. Well, Sam Harris is a Golden Girls Trust Fund baby too. I have no idea what that means. His moral landscape is great to discuss and build from. Yes. Oppie is a proper Aussie bloke too. Oh, okay.
I reckon
Okay.
some good stuff there. Thanks, Fenton. Brilliant, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Fenton. And anyone else? Well, he actually dominated tonight as the only person making comments and stuff, which is all good. All right, we are none the wiser. Let's return to our corners, get our boxing gloves off, and
Oh, that felt good. A bit of rough and tumble.
yeah, a couple of those jabs, mate. You pretended to miss them, but they hit. I know. Ready for Korma. Joking, of course. Is that what you're having for dinner?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Wow.
Nice.
Yum,
Yeah.
yum, yum.
Oh, yeah.
Fabulous. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much. We'll come up with another subject next Wednesday and do it again.
Brilliant.
I reckon we should talk about what happens when your partner is or isn't religious and you're the opposite.
Yeesh, yeah, that can be difficult.
Well, that in the Bible is called unequally yoked.
Oh,
And it was forbidden, certainly in the Old Testament, as most things were. But yes, you weren't allowed to be with a partner who was not of the same ilk. It was frowned upon.
And
You
yet
are unequally
you're supposed to
yoked.
marry the opposite sex, which is even weirder. So obviously we're the ones dragging them down. I'm just saying.
That's right.
Clearly.
Thanks everyone for watching. Really appreciate you. We will be back next week with an atheist, a believer, and a pastor walk into a bar, which they are yet to do, but we do promise we're going to do it. We're going to film it, and we're going to make we could do a whole episode in the pub.
I reckon we could do it in the bar.
Who's driving the Paronga ups? Not me.
yeah.
We'll have to do
good
it.
point.
We'll do a Zoomie in the pub. Anyway, thanks guys. Catch
All
you
right.
next week.
Brilliant.
Thanks everyone. Bye. See ya.